Good morning and welcome. I hope to enlighten you with regards to trade in endangered species and the organisations that work together in managing the trade internationally. Now, I work for an organisation in its whole, which is called Cycads, and Cycads is a UN agreement, and Cycads, the acronym, stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And this has been in force since 1975. And across the world, we have parties as an acronym for countries. So we have 175 countries that's party to CITES, and we all work together in trying to manage the trade internationally in endangered species via a permit system. As you can see, we've got very wide coverage, everything in green. Those are all parties to CITES. And species on CITES, we've got 34,000 species on CITES, of which 25,000 are your orchid species. So it's a bit of a job keeping track of all the species on CITES, so constantly referencing. CITES has got 3 appendices, and I'm not going to bore you with that. The 3 appendices just have different levels of protection for your different species. And Appendix 1 is your species that no commercial trade is allowed. In saying that when we do have trade, we will have trade for zoos, or if the item is older than 1975, personal, because now it's an old item, and for scientific purposes. And these are just examples of tabua, whale's teeth, rhino horn. You'll have some of your parrot species eggs, that's on CITES, and your green turtles, and I just forgot what the other turtle. Hawksbill, thank you. Right. So those are examples of Appendix 1. Appendix 2 is items that we see very often when we go overseas, and we see items that might be of touristy value, which is very often we'll have skins, like this python skin down here. Snake skins and most of your reptiles on Appendix 2, so it's allowed for trade, but you can find them in shops. It's a novelty item. They often come in the form of a handbag, or a wallet, or shoes. So, that looks really nice. I can have that, that's cool. Coral is another very big item that was moved internationally. And with our Asian market, we have little seahorses that they often use for cooking and medicinal use. Caviar from our Middle Eastern countries and Russia, those countries, that's a very consumable item. So these are, and Appendix 3, trade is allowed. It's not as strict as the Appendix 2 ones, but trade is still allowed and still regulated. And things of concern here is our own green geckos and red coral that we have here in New Zealand. My history with conservation started in South Africa, as I'm sure you've heard by the accent by now. And I graduated in 1988, so I'm still a youngster by far. And conservation in Pretoria, which is just north of Johannesburg. And directly after that, I went into the field and I started working, and I was involved in game capture, culling, environmental education. I did a lot of ecology work as well, which was collecting samples of mainly flora and cataloguing that. And these are all things that I did, game capture. That is what you call a boma. And generally what you do, and this was exciting times in South Africa, we didn't do a lot of health and safety stuff, and the students were always pushed up front. You will go and do the dirty work. So as students, we were hiding behind those trees, and you will wait until the chopper comes around, and the chopper will come from there and herd the animals in, and as the animals come through, you jump out from behind a tree with a curtain, and you run like hell for the other side. So you'll run from that side to that side, so the animals can't break back. But very often we would have animals like giraffes, and they didn't have much regard for little trees and bushes. And I've had cases where you're hiding behind the bush, and then the giraffe comes in, you've got to bail out of that bush pretty fast, otherwise the giraffe just ran straight over you. So what happens then is as the animals come closer and closer to this corridor, you have curtains that you pull across, and then they are gently herded into the corridor and onto a truck. A lot of your game capture, though, is not done via bow miss, it's done via darting, where you dart an animal, and as soon as it's darted, you have a ground team that you will have in Land Rovers, and you'll rush to the spot where the animal actually grounded, and you need to run up to that animal as soon as possible, especially antelope species, and lift up the head, because they do regurgitate stomach fluid, and then when they inhale, it goes into the lungs, and they can actually aspirate. So, and sometimes they're not. Most of the time, in fact, you will have somebody that grabs the horns, you'll have somebody that's on the legs, and from around that leg, somebody holding the tail, because this animal's still fairly much alive. And the most fun I had was rhino capture. Also happens with darting, like there. And as soon as the animal's down, you have to rush up to the animal, and you have about 10, 12 people that will push the rhino back up onto its haunches, onto its chest, because otherwise it can suffocate. Then you blindfold the animal and you put ropes around the horn, between the first and the second horn, and the vet will come along and you'll give it an antidote to the drug, and that rhino stands up, and now you steer it via those two ropes. And the animal gets up and starts walking, and you have to steer, and you'll have 10, 20 people on lines on both sides of the animal, and you steer it towards the truck and off you go. Saddest work was culling. It's a necessity in Africa, where, especially with elephants. As soon as you enclose an area, you have to start managing numbers of wild animals. Management. And unfortunately, our cutest, there we call them cuddly animals, because they're so human-like, they need to be culled because they become very destructive. And if you just have a look just around in the bush surrounding, animals, elephants, as soon as the numbers get too large, they really decimate a bush completely, and there's nothing left for your other antelope to survive on. So you have to manage the numbers, and when you do, you cull an elephant family from the youngest to the oldest, because you can't just take the bulls or just the cows or just the youngsters. Sometimes you will have youngsters left over that will basically be saved, and it will be translocated to other parks within the southern African region to help with other breeding programs for the populations of Africa. Other stuff that I did or dealt with a lot as a law enforcement officer was the trade in bushmeat that mainly came from Central Africa. And it's a sad thing to see. Bushmeat trade is rife, and it's due to socioeconomic reasons. People don't have money to farm, they don't have money, there's no work, and because this trade is so lucrative, they can make money. They can earn a year's wage for a gorilla head, for example, or a gorilla hen that's been made into an ashtray. Other reason for this is cultural. There's nothing wrong in Central Africa to have chimpanzee meat as your daily protein. It is the same as what we would go to the meat butcher. There's no issues with regards to that. Other trade that I dealt with as a law enforcement officer in South Africa was smuggling, of course. Two biggest ones was rhino horn and ivory. And a lesser known trade is our reptile trade, where people, this is not a mock-up photo, this really happens. Reptiles worldwide is a commodity. People love reptiles. There's very rare species. They also love African species. This is a photo from snakes that came in from all over the world and then out again. Our pythons, South African pythons, our cobras, our venomous species are very sought after. And they will just be parceled up and couriered to somebody, or just in the post, because they can survive 3 to 4 weeks in a parcel. The same with the trade that came into South Africa. Very often the International Mail Centre would call me, and they would just have opened the parcel, got a very big surprise, threw the parcel into a big skip, and I've got the epaulets on. You come and catch the snakes in the skip. I'm terrified of snakes. Just have to. And then something that's very unique to Africa, but it is becoming a worldwide problem, is our cycads. And cycads is also what we call living fossils. These plants originated 25 million years ago with our dinosaurs, and they honestly are living fossils. We have a serious international trade with cycads. They can sell up to 35,000 US for a specimen on the black market. That will be one of your more sought after rare species, admittedly, but that plant will most probably only be about 1.5 meters high. Like I said, our main export is to the USA. Most of our cycad species are now extinct in the wild, and we only have a few populations left. We have thousands that are in gardens and in nurseries, but unfortunately, cycads need species-specific weevils to pollinate. And if those cycads come out of the nature and is in a garden, they've been removed from a very specific area where that weevil originates or stays to pollinate the specific species of cycads. So we end up, in actual fact, with thousands of sterile specimens in gardens and in landscaped areas. So it's no use. And commercially, in a nursery, cycads are sold per centimetre at about $10 a centimetre. So it's a very, very lucrative trade. And because of that, there's about 5 populations of cycads in South Africa, with plants from 50 to 200, numbered to 50 to 200, that are now microchipped right into the core, into the centre of the plant, with all the details of the specimen, where it's located, GPS, everything you can think of is loaded onto that chip. And they have found plants that's been microchipped in the US, in California. I run the scanner over it and we've got it. So we know that plant has been taken from the wild. There's just no two ways about it. Other big trade that I dealt with in South Africa was the trade in parrot species. African greys from Central Africa. They were brought in at 200, 250 birds at a time, often smuggled in poster tubes, where they were just tied up with tape, with their wings, and popped into tubes and posted, carried maybe. So yeah, there was a rife trade in all of these, and even today we still have. In fact, there's trade linked from South Africa to New Zealand with parrot species, with eggs that's been carried on people's bodies coming in, and we did actually catch a South African that came in. Sad to say, he was talking very loudly. This was about 2-3 years ago, and customs couldn't figure out why this guy's talking so loudly. And eventually, when he stopped talking, in the silence we heard a chirp, and one of the eggs actually hatched on his body. And that was the only thing that alerted customs there's something else going on here, because they thought he was doing drugs. They never had an inkling there was eggs on him. And that's where we got him. And then after my years in South Africa, I came to New Zealand, did a few stints before I was welcomed into the Department of Conservation to carry on with my work in CITES. And in New Zealand, we have our national legislation, and that is the Trade in Endangered Species Act, which we deal with. And our national legislation is a complement, basically, to CITES, the text of the convention from CITES, which is a guideline for us how to deal with the trade in endangered species in every country. So a country would have a national legislation based on the model of the guidelines of CITES. And here in New Zealand, we work with 3 groups. We, as the Department of Conservation, work very closely together with the Wildlife Enforcement Group, which, when we come across something, because we're just paper pushers really, we come across something and say, hang on, there's something amiss here. This is an item of high value. It's in a commercial quantity. I think the Wildlife Enforcement Group should look into this further, and they'll take the matter further, and they will prosecute on the Trade and Endangered Species Act. We have the New Zealand Customs Service and also MAF that work as our border agents for us. And they're the people that you meet when you come in from overseas and check that your MAF will check if your shoes are clean, if you've got any seeds with you, any plant products, any food, we all know that. And Customs will have a look to see if you've got any other items of interest. But at the same time, they're also going to look at your arrivals card. We all know there's an arrivals card. And if you have anything on there that you've actually circled, yes, they will have a look at it, and they will seize any items should you not have a permit and it is of CITES interest. If it's a CITES species listed on any one of the appendices and you do not have any form of paperwork for that, they will seize it and they will forward it to us, and we process those seizures. So we work very closely with those two agents. They're very important for us in our work. And in New Zealand, we have a major imports would be traditional Chinese medicine, of which we have a few examples here as well. And we have trophies from Africa, coral from our Pacific Islands in Australia, and crocodilian species, heaps from Australia as well. Crocodile country, people love bringing in souvenirs. All good and well and wonderful if we have a permit that accompanies those. That's fantastic. And our major exports that we have in New Zealand is tree ferns, live, ornamental plants and other nurseries in Europe mainly, and we do still export a lot of parrot species that has been now captive bred for the last 20-25 years in New Zealand. Other things that really leave is bagpipes, because they have ivory ferrules, all those little white things in between. Those are the ferrules and they are ivory. And there's an example of ivory over here. Mainly people would have, those bagpipes would have come from Scotland many years ago. They're very old. They would leave New Zealand because people are going to a show in Europe or in Australia to play the band, and they come back again. Stuff like this, what we call a tambua from Fiji. It's a whale's teeth. Now our whales, all whales are on Appendix 1, and if you can remember, I know there was a lot of stuff on the slides. Appendix 1, you're not allowed to trade commercially. Very often, most of the times with these whale's tooth, even if it is older than 1975, you still need what you call a pre-convention CITES certificate. And a lot of time people come through, we don't realise that it's a cultural item, throw it in a bag. We come to New Zealand and it gets confiscated. And it's just it's as easy as going to your local environmental office in the country where you are selecting an item and ask them, do I need a permit for this to take it back with me? CITES do have some exemptions, which is personal or household effects, and that is if the item is in your older than 1975 and it's your personal item, or you're moving from one country to the next, then there's an exemption which you do not need a permit for. But you need to find out from the country where you're going to if that country's national legislation is not stricter than CITES, because they might just want you to have an import permit as well, or produce a permit. And Australia is one of those countries. Australia does not allow any whale ivory into Australia, pre-convention or not. They just don't want it. That's their stricter domestic measure. We have a lot of whalebone carvings and necklaces that Maori has sourced through iwi, which they're allowed to do, and they sell them on the market. And I'm sure there's a lot of tourists that's done exactly that in New Zealand, bought those necklaces, flew back to the US and was confiscated because it's a whale item. And that whale could have died 10 years ago, so it's not pre-conventional. That is a current, and it was commercially traded. Even though it's a personal item, but it's now not, it's a lot younger than 1975. So it doesn't have that exemption. So what they should do, and which shop owners must do, which we're really trying to get out there, is inform people. Yeah. If you do buy an item like that, contact DOC, or contact your local environmental or conservation body in whichever country. We all travel. A lot of us go to overseas. get a piece of coral in Rarotonga, Fiji or wherever, and it's stunning, fantastic. We see them in shops all over Australia. Well, if they sell it in a shop, sure, I can take it with me. Then it might be no issue if they're selling it in a shop. You need a permit. So best advice is always to check with that environmental organisation in the country where you are buying your item.
Before you leave that
Before
country,
you leave. And it's as easy as a phone call. I mean, every government organisation is very easy to find in any countries. Easy as a phone call. Do I need a permit to take this item back with me to New Zealand? Or to wherever I'm going to? It's easy as that. With us, when we often have people that will apply for a CITES export permit and say, I've got this piece of ivory, I got it in, my grandmother got it. Okay, well, you need to prove the age of this because we can't just issue a permit for taking the ivory. There's a lot of value to that item, especially if it's a raw ivory item. And basically, it's a sworn affidavit. And there's not much more you can do, except you can maybe go the extra mile and tell them they need to send it into the laboratory to have it age tested at their expense and bring us the lab reports. And little things like that. But yeah, there's various issues, and it is trying to regulate the trade in a managed way where you can still ensure some conservation to wild populations out there, because not all trade does actually successfully manage conservation status. Only interesting case I can think of was during my years in South Africa as law enforcement officer, where we did have 2 chimpanzees, baby chimpanzees that came in from Zaire, and they just arrived at the airport in these little mesh wire cages that you could literally squash. And these are 2 chimps, brother and a sister that sat there, and we made the call to go underground and pose as buyers to try and get more information from the person who brought them in. And it was a lady from Zaire, French-speaking lady, and we met her out on a game farm north of Johannesburg. And what was very concerning was that she explained to us that whatever you wanted, you can have. Whether it was diamonds, gold, a gorilla live or dead, chimpanzees, lion, you name it. Whatever you wanted, she'll be able to organise for you to get it. What would you like? What is your shopping list? And you're quite astounded. That was really eye-opening. Didn't realise that it was, and money is just no object at all. And if we didn't want that, well, what drugs would you like? We can do that too. So, it's all there. What is interesting, I thought I'll just pop this in. I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's just to give you an idea of what's happening on the black market out there with the trade in endangered species. It's a market that is fairly large and runs in billions of dollars. And to note, our little species, geckos from New Zealand, is worth $1,300 in Europe. It is broken down in various little, you have baby elephants, you'll have a dead tiger and a live tiger, all kinds of things carrying on. And what is noteworthy is this information is absolutely freely available on the internet. You hop on and you just ask any black market activities or values, you can go on and you can see how much it's going for. And in a way, this is very informative, but in a way, this is also encouraging trade. I can make money out of this. Wonderful. And we tend to think of trade very quickly, just belonging or just happening in certain countries. But we have species seized in London, and that's just between those years. 30,000 endangered species were smuggled illegally. It's London. We think London, we would take it there. New York. This little cub was on its way to New York. as part of a illegal trade. And yeah, who would ever think that you would have stores in New York where you can buy these species freely available? So it's just an example to show you guys that it does not just happen in certain countries or undeveloped countries, it happens everywhere. The trafficking is worth an estimated 18 to 26 billion euros a year. That is just Europe. We are talking 320 odd billion US for the rest of the world. I've just given you an example for Europe, where we're at with that. And currently, from everywhere in the world, Europe and the EU, all the countries in the EU, is our foremost market for any black market trade in our endangered species. In the olden days, well, not very long ago, animals, a purchaser would actually accompany whatever wildlife he's trading, will accompany it and go and sell it himself. Now we're using couriers and mail orders, and specifically now, lately, the internet. It's very easy to buy anything on the internet. I'm sure we all know that. We have highly sophisticated Colombian groups that work together with drug traffickers, specifically. Drugs, human trafficking, and what's the other thing? Can't quite remember. But those, they call them specific names. But people are now combining different criminal activities to get the highest value out of their trade. The Chinese organised crime is mainly based in Hong Kong, and they mainly deal with traditional Chinese medicine that contains derivatives of endangered species. It will be tiger bone, bear bile, lots of plant products that's highly endangered, and they are getting to a point where they are legally selling those medicines to corporate businesses in Europe in a legal, in a legitimate way. It's difficult to catch these people. As you can see, they use the legitimate business structures to get their goods in and make a heap of money. This evidence all points to an increasing interest in what we call polycriminal organised crime groups. That just means polycriminal is crime groups that diversifies. We do a lot of things to get the best bang for our buck. So I'll bring you drugs and you give me endangered wildlife, and I'm going to trade that for human trafficking on that side. And that's exactly what's happening. As you can, high-level drug, and the drug trafficking from the Southern Americas got a huge role to play in that. And what they have found now is that the way that they used to traffic drugs, they are now using or incorporating wildlife to do that. So wildlife is now the front, and within that wildlife, or within the cages or bags, you will find your drugs. They are now using animals as couriers. So they pump them, they actually insert bags of heroin, coke, and you name it, into the animals. So that's the front of these things going through. And this is just an example of, not all is lost. It sounds a dreadful picture, but we all are working out there, everywhere internationally. And this material is really, it's not unique for me to have put this up. This is freely available because all of these organisations have put heaps of material on the internet to make us all publicly aware of the plight of our endangered species and the international trade that does take place within it. And these are really key foundations. Asian Wing is an organisation that works with all our Asian countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, China, and also with Malaysia, and they are doing tremendous work. We have a very highly concentrated crime network in the East, and they are doing tremendous work in educating and basically catching our illegal wildlife traders. And I think that's just about all I can tell you for endangered wildlife trade. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask me. Please do.